Sarah Morgan stood frozen in the center of the grand hall of her mansion, her bare feet cold against the marble floor. The silence around her was deafening, but inside, a storm was brewing. Her eyes were locked on her phone screen, on the image that had shattered her world in a single moment. Daniel, her husband, arm in arm with a young blonde woman. They were smiling like they didn't have a care in the world. Behind them, a sunlit beach stretched out, an exclusive tropical island that she and Daniel had once promised to visit together. But now he was there, with someone else. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as her mind spun. It wasn't just the affair itself, it was the boldness of it. Daniel, always careful, always calculating, had slipped up in a way she never imagined. He had spent years perfecting his public image as the devoted husband and ruthless business tycoon. So why now? Why would he risk everything by flaunting his betrayal? The phone buzzed in her hand, breaking her thoughts. A new message appeared, from an unknown number. You really thought he'd be loyal? The real question is, what are you going to do about it? Her fingers tightened around the phone until her knuckles turned white. The pain of the grip snapped her back into focus. She inhaled deeply, trying to steady her nerves. What am I going to do about it? That question echoed inside her mind. For years, Sarah had been the flawless face of the Morgan Empire, enduring whispers, rumors, and suspicions with poise. But this was different. This was a direct, undeniable slap in the face. Her marriage, her reputation, it was all unraveling. She walked toward the massive floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the still waters of the lake outside. The serene landscape bathed in moonlight mocked the chaos raging inside her. For a moment, she considered calling Daniel. She could demand an explanation, but she knew how that would go. He'd lie, twist the truth, smooth-talk his way out of it like always. No, she didn't want words. She wanted him to feel the same pain, the same shame she was drowning in right now. Memories rushed in like a tidal wave. Lavish dinner parties, charity galas, the way other women would eye Daniel when they thought no one was watching. The hushed whispers about his business trips. She had ignored it all, clinging to the belief that their marriage was stronger than gossip. But now, the ghosts of all those rumors had come to life. Daniel had crossed a line, and Sarah knew one thing. She couldn't be the passive, silent wife anymore. The chime of the antique clock echoed through the hall. It was 2 a.m. Sarah sank into the leather couch, the weight of her choices pressing down on her. Part of her wanted to disappear, to escape the public humiliation that was sure to follow. But another part, darker, stronger, was awakening. It was a part of her she barely recognized, a woman who refused to be a victim. You never saw me as a threat, Daniel. But you should have. She picked up her phone again, her fingers hovering over the screen. She didn't have a solid plan yet, but she knew one thing for certain. Daniel wouldn't get away with this. He thought he was untouchable, sitting on some private beach halfway across the world, insulated by wealth and power. But no one is safe from a woman who's lost everything to fight for. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon. Sarah rose from the couch, a new sense of purpose coursing through her veins. She knew exactly who to call. Someone who knew all the dirty secrets of the Morgan Empire, and someone who had every reason to help her. The pieces were falling into place. The game had just begun. Sarah now has a decision to make. But what will she do next? Share your thoughts in the comments. And of course, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next twists in this story. The upcoming drama is closer than you think. The low hum of the black sedan's engine was the only sound breaking the quiet suburban street as Sarah pulled up to a nondescript 2-story house. It wasn't grand, not like the mansions she was used to visiting. But the man who lived inside didn't need extravagance to command power. His name was Michael Hayes, a former fixer for her husband's company, someone who had quietly made problems disappear when needed. He had been loyal to Daniel once, until Daniel cut ties and left him to take the fall for a legal scandal. Sarah knew he still harbored a grudge, and tonight, she planned to use that resentment to her advantage. She stepped out of the car and glanced around. The neighborhood was eerily still, the streetlights casting long, flickering shadows across the pavement. Sarah hesitated for a moment, the weight of what she was about to do pressing down on her shoulders. Is this really who I am now? The question haunted her, but she quickly shoved it aside. You don't have a choice. He didn't give you one. The front door creaked open before she could knock. Michael stood in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted by the dim light from inside. His sharp eyes narrowed as he took her in. Sarah Morgan, he said, his voice low and rough. Didn't think I'd ever see you here. To what do I owe the pleasure? There was a faint smirk on his face, but she could see the suspicion beneath it. I need your help, Sarah said, stepping forward. She kept her voice steady, despite the tension crackling between them. Michael didn't trust easily, and why would he? Daniel had burned him. But Sarah wasn't here to make excuses for her husband's betrayal. She was here to offer something far more enticing. Michael crossed his arms and leaned against the doorframe. Help? Last I checked, you were still living in that lakeside palace. What kind of help could you possibly need from someone like me? His words were laced with bitterness, but there was also curiosity in his gaze. He wasn't going to turn her away. Not yet. Sarah took a deep breath. Daniel, she said simply, he's betrayed me. I need to take back control. And I think you're the only person who can help me do that. For a moment, Michael didn't respond. The air between them grew heavier as he studied her, searching for any sign of weakness. Finally, he chuckled softly and stepped aside, motioning for her to come in. Well, this just got interesting. Come on, let's talk. Sarah followed him inside, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. The house was sparse, almost Spartan, with minimal furniture and no personal touches. It was a far cry from the lavish surroundings she was used to, but it suited Michael, practical, no nonsense, and dangerous in his simplicity. They sat across from each other at a worn wooden table. Michael leaned forward, resting his elbows on the surface. So, let me get this straight. You want revenge on Daniel Morgan? You realize that's no small task. He's got resources, allies. And you? What do you have? Sarah met his gaze head-on. I have information, she said, her voice cold and sharp. I know things that could ruin him, things he thought I'd never find out. And I have you. You want payback for what he did to you? Help me and we both win. Michael's eyes gleamed with interest. He sat back, considering her words for a long moment. Then, a slow smile spread across his face. All right, Sarah, you've got my attention. But this isn't going to be easy. If we're going to do this, you need to be ready for things to get messy. Sarah's expression didn't falter. I've already lost too much. I'm ready for whatever comes next. The steady hum of the private jet's engines filled the cabin as Daniel Morgan leaned back in his leather seat, a glass of bourbon in his hand. He gazed out the window at the endless stretch of clouds below, a satisfied smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. The deal in the Caribbean had gone better than expected. Not only had he secured a new multi-million-dollar project, but he had done so while basking in the company of someone who made him feel alive again, Mia, the vibrant young woman now sleeping peacefully on the seat across from him. Sarah would never know, he thought, or at least that's what he believed. Little did he realize that his world was already beginning to unravel. In that moment, Sarah and Michael Hayes were finalizing their first move. It wasn't enough to simply expose the affair. That would be too predictable, too easy to sweep under the rug. No, Sarah wanted to hit him where it would hurt the most. His empire. And Michael knew exactly how to do it. Corporate power is all about perception. Michael had explained earlier, his tone cold and calculating. If people see cracks in your foundation, they'll swarm like vultures. Daniel's built his whole career on his image. We don't just destroy the man, we destroy the myth. Now, as the jet soared through the sky, Daniel was blissfully unaware that an anonymous leak was making its way to several major news outlets. It contained confidential documents tied to a questionable offshore account, one that could suggest financial misconduct in his latest business ventures. A scandal of this magnitude would send shockwaves through the boardrooms of his company. Michael had warned Sarah that the fallout could be brutal, but she didn't flinch. Let it be, she had said. He's survived too many storms already. This time he won't. Back in the mansion, Sarah paced the floor, her mind racing. She had expected to feel a sense of triumph after setting the plan in motion, but instead, a deep unease gnawed at her. She was stepping into a dangerous game, one where she could just as easily lose as win. Her phone buzzed. Michael again. It's done. His voice came through, low and steady. The story will break within 24 hours. Once it does, he'll know you're behind it. I don't care, Sarah replied, though her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. Let him know. He needs to understand what it feels like to lose control. There was a pause on the other end of the line before Michael responded. Good. Just remember, Sarah, once this starts, there's no going back. I know, she whispered, ending the call. She set the phone down and exhaled slowly. There's no going back. The words echoed in her mind like a mantra. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming her sense of self, the part of her that had been overshadowed and suffocated by Daniel's lies. Meanwhile, halfway across the world, Daniel's phone pinged. He glanced at the screen and frowned. A series of emails marked urgent filled his inbox. He sighed, muttering under his breath. It never ends. He reluctantly opened the first message. As he read, the color drained from his face. What the hell is this? He muttered, scrolling through the leaked documents. Panic surged in his chest as the gravity of the situation hit him. This wasn't just a setback, this was a full-blown attack. And deep down, he had a sinking suspicion of who was behind it. Daniel's gaze darkened as he set his bourbon aside. The peaceful island getaway had just turned into a battlefield. And for the first time in years, he felt a flicker of fear. Sarah wasn't the passive woman he had left behind. She was coming for him. Daniel stormed into his hotel suite, his mind racing and his pulse pounding. The messages had continued nonstop. Calls from board members, emails demanding explanations, and headlines that had already gone public. Morgan Industries under fire. Secret offshore accounts expose. Read one of the top stories. He slammed his phone onto the marble counter, the sound echoing through the spacious room. Mia, startled by his sudden entrance, sat up on the bed. Daniel, what's going on? She asked, her voice groggy with sleep. Nothing you need to worry about, he snapped, pacing furiously. His mind was already calculating the damage. This couldn't be a coincidence. He knew how airtight his business dealings were, or so he had thought. Someone had to have access to highly sensitive information. And there was only one person who might be both angry and ruthless enough to pull this off. Sarah. He felt a surge of anger, but also something far more unsettling. Fear. Sarah had always been composed, graceful in public, and supportive behind closed doors. He had never considered her a threat. But this was a move designed to cripple him. He picked up his phone again and scrolled through his contacts. He hesitated for a moment, his thumb hovering over her name. What would he even say? Admit he'd underestimated her? Demand answers? He clenched his jaw and tossed the phone back onto the counter. Daniel, you're scaring me, Mia said softly, stepping closer. Her presence irritated him more than it comforted him. This wasn't the time for distractions. He turned to her, his expression cold. Pack your things. We're leaving. What? We just got here. Now, he growled, cutting her off. The sharpness in his voice silenced her protests. Mia stared at him for a moment before reluctantly nodding. She knew better than to push him when he was like this. As she hurried to gather her belongings, Daniel's mind kept racing. He needed to get ahead of this, and that meant confronting Sarah on his own terms. Back at the mansion, Sarah was bracing herself for the fallout. The morning news had already begun reporting on the scandal, and social media was abuzz with speculation. She watched from the comfort of her sunroom, sipping coffee as her phone vibrated with notifications. Her lawyer had already called, warning her that Daniel might retaliate in ways she hadn't anticipated. But Sarah wasn't intimidated. This was a war, and she wouldn't back down. As she stared out at the calm waters of the lake, her thoughts drifted back to their early years together. She had loved Daniel once, truly, deeply. He had been ambitious, charming, and full of promise. But somewhere along the way, that ambition had turned into greed, and his charm had become manipulation. He had built walls around himself, shutting her out of every important decision. For too long, she had played the role of the perfect wife, always smiling, always accommodating. Not anymore. Her phone rang, snapping her out of her thoughts. She glanced at the caller ID. Daniel. She took a deep breath and let it ring a few more times before finally answering. "Hello, Daniel," she said, her tone calm, almost detached. "Cut the act, Sarah," he barked on the other end. "I know it was you." She didn't flinch. "Know what, exactly? Don't play dumb. The leaks, the offshore account story, it's all too convenient. You're trying to sabotage me," he accused, his voice laced with anger and desperation. Sarah smiled to herself. Maybe you should be asking yourself why someone would feel the need to sabotage you in the first place. Actions have consequences, Daniel. You should know that better than anyone. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. She could almost hear him grinding his teeth. "You have no idea what you've started," he finally said, his voice low and dangerous. "Oh, I know exactly what I've started," she replied coolly. "The question is, are you ready for it?" Before he could respond, she ended the call and set the phone down. Her heart was pounding, but she refused to show any sign of weakness. This was just the beginning, and she needed to stay one step ahead at all times. Daniel sat in the back of his limousine, his fists clenched tightly on his lap. The car sped through the city streets, taking him to the corporate office for the emergency board meeting. Outside the tinted windows, reporters and onlookers crowded near the building's entrance, their cameras flashing like strobe lights. It was chaos, and Daniel could feel the weight of every eye watching him. His mind raced. He had to regain control of the narrative of his business and of Sarah. She wouldn't win this. As the car came to a stop, his driver looked back nervously. "Sir, security is ready to escort you through the side entrance," he said. "No," Daniel barked. "We go through the front. I'm not running from anyone." He straightened his tie, forcing himself to appear composed. Every step he took into that building needed to project confidence, even if he felt the cracks widening beneath him. The moment he stepped out of the car, the crowd surged forward. "Mr. Morgan, is it true you've been hiding millions offshore?" One reporter shouted. Another chimed in, "Are the allegations going to impact your leadership of Morgan Industries?" The questions came fast and relentless, but Daniel ignored them, walking with purposeful strides toward the entrance. His security team held the crowd at bay, but the shouts and camera clicks echoed behind him, gnawing at his nerves. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was no less tense. The room was filled with the company's most powerful stakeholders, their faces grim and expectant. At the head of the table, Richard Evans, the chairman of the board, fixed Daniel with a piercing glare. "Daniel," he began, his voice cold, "we need answers. This leak is a PR disaster. Investors are threatening to pull out unless we get ahead of this immediately." Daniel cleared his throat and forced a calm smile. "This is all based on misinformation. We're conducting a thorough internal investigation, and I assure you, the truth will vindicate us. The company's finances are solid. This is nothing more than an attack on our reputation." "An attack from whom?" Richard shot back. "Do you have any leads on who could have leaked this information?" Daniel hesitated. He knew who he suspected, but revealing it would make him look weak. "Not yet," he lied. "But we'll find them, and when we do, they'll face legal consequences." As the meeting continued, Daniel's phone vibrated in his pocket. He discreetly glanced at the screen. It was a text from Sarah. "You should have been more careful, Daniel. Actions have consequences." His stomach churned. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. She was taunting him, letting him know that the war was only beginning. Daniel's gaze hardened as he pocketed the phone. If Sarah wanted a fight, she would get one. But no one crossed Daniel Morgan and walked away unscathed. Will Daniel turn things around? What is Sarah really planning? Share your theories in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe for the next exciting chapter. Sarah stood at the edge of the lake, the soft breeze playing with the edges of her robe. The water shimmered under the early morning sun, calm and undisturbed. It was a deceptive calm, a mirror of her own thoughts. She had sent the message to Daniel the night before, and she knew it had hit its target. He's probably losing his mind right now, trying to figure out what's coming next. The thought gave her a small, bitter sense of satisfaction. For years, she had been the one waiting in the dark, questioning every move, every whisper. Now the roles were reversed. Behind her, the sliding glass door of the mansion opened and closed quietly. Sarah didn't turn around, but she recognized the footsteps on the wooden deck. Michael Hayes approached, carrying a steaming mug of coffee. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked casually, though his voice carried an undertone of concern. He leaned against the railing, his gaze following hers out to the lake. "No," Sarah admitted, finally turning to face him. "Too much on my mind. Daniel knows I'm behind this now. He's probably pacing his office, barking orders at his assistants, trying to put out fires he can't control. It's exactly where I want him to be." Her words were calm, but there was a sharp edge to them, a hint of the anger that still simmered beneath the surface. Michael nodded slowly, sipping his coffee. "You've got him rattled, that's for sure. But you do realize this won't end with him panicking. Daniel's not the type to roll over and give up. He'll hit back, probably harder than you expect." "I know," Sarah said quietly. "That's what I'm counting on. Daniel only makes mistakes when he's desperate. And now, for the first time in his life, he's vulnerable. He won't see what's coming until it's too late." Michael chuckled, shaking his head. "You're full of surprises, Sarah. A month ago, I wouldn't have pegged you for someone who'd take down a guy like Daniel Morgan. But here you are, planning his downfall like a pro." He paused, watching her carefully. "You sure you're ready for what happens next? Once we escalate, there's no going back. He'll see this as a war." Sarah met his gaze without flinching. "It is a war, Michael. One he started the moment he decided I was disposable. I'm not going to stop until he understands what that mistake cost him." She turned back to the lake, her expression hardening. For too long, she had played by Daniel's rules, always stepping aside, always staying quiet. But that version of her was gone now, buried under years of broken promises and silent betrayals. Michael exhaled through his nose, a low, approving sound. "All right," he said. "We hit him where it counts. His allies, his connections. If we make the people around him doubt his power, the whole foundation crumbles. I can start spreading the word, subtle whispers to the right people. By the time Daniel realizes it, half his board will already be second-guessing their loyalty to him." "Good," Sarah replied. "Start today. I want the pressure to build from every direction. He needs to feel isolated, with nowhere to turn." Michael straightened, giving her a short nod. "Consider it done. But keep your guard up. Daniel's not going to sit back and wait to lose. He'll retaliate, and when he does, it won't be pretty." "I'm ready," Sarah whispered, though her heart raced in anticipation. As Michael headed back inside, she remained by the lake, watching the rippling water. Daniel had spent years building walls of power and influence, but now those walls were beginning to crack. He had underestimated her for too long. Let him come. This time, I'm ready. Daniel's footsteps echoed through the marble corridors of Morgan Industries headquarters. His jaw was clenched so tightly it ached, and every muscle in his body was taut with barely contained fury. The emergency board meeting had been a disaster. Accusations and pointed questions had come at him from all directions, and while he had deflected most of them with his usual confidence, he could feel the growing unease in the room. "They smell blood," he thought bitterly. "Sarah's turning them against me." As he entered his office, he slammed the door shut with enough force to rattle the windows. His assistant, Jonathan, followed close behind, his face pale and nervous. "Sir, I have the latest reports from the PR team," Jonathan began hesitantly. "The media is pushing harder for a statement, and the stock is continuing to drop. Some major investors are considering pulling out." Daniel glared at him, the words hitting like daggers. "Tell them to hold the line," he snapped. "We've weathered worse than this. I want a statement drafted that denies all allegations. Make it clear that these leaks are nothing but a coordinated attack on my reputation." Jonathan nodded quickly, but he hesitated, shifting uncomfortably. "There's one more thing." Richard Evans called again. "He's demanding another meeting by the end of the day. He says the board wants to explore appointing a temporary CEO until the situation stabilizes." Daniel froze. A temporary CEO? His blood ran cold. They were already plotting to take control from him. For years, he had ruled over this company with an iron grip. No one dared challenge his authority. But now, because of Sarah's moves, his empire was teetering on the edge of collapse. He turned slowly to Jonathan, his voice dangerously low. "If they think they can replace me, they're in for a rude awakening. Schedule the meeting. I'll handle Richard personally." Jonathan swallowed hard and left the office without another word. Once he was gone, Daniel let out a shaky breath and ran a hand through his hair. His mind was spinning. Every instinct told him to fight back with brute force, to crush anyone who stood in his way. But Sarah, she wasn't fighting fair. She had outmaneuvered him in ways he hadn't anticipated. He couldn't afford to make another mistake. He paced the room, his thoughts returning to the message she had sent. Actions have consequences. It was more than a taunt. It was a declaration of war. He knew her well enough to understand that she wouldn't stop until he was broken. A part of him almost admired her for it. Almost. But admiration didn't matter now. What mattered was destroying her before she destroyed him. Reaching for his phone, Daniel scrolled through his contacts until he found the name of a private investigator he had used in the past. If Sarah wanted to play dirty, he would match her move for move. He pressed the call button and waited as the line connected. "Mr. Morgan," the voice on the other end greeted him. "Long time no talk. What can I do for you?" "I need information," Daniel said curtly. "On Sarah Morgan. I want to know who she's working with, what her next move is, and any weakness I can exploit. I want everything you can find. Fast." "Consider it done," the investigator replied. "You'll have an update in 24 hours. Daniel ended the call and leaned against his desk, exhaling slowly. His mind raced through possible strategies. If Sarah thought she could bring him to his knees, she was dead wrong. He had built his empire from the ground up, and no one, not even his wife, was going to take it from him. Michael Hayes sat at the corner booth of a dimly lit diner, his eyes scanning the entrance as he stirred his black coffee. The diner was quiet except for the occasional clink of dishes. It was the perfect place for a discreet meeting, public enough to avoid suspicion but private enough for serious conversations. He had arranged this meeting with someone who had been inside Morgan Industries for years. Amanda Greer, a mid-level executive who had become disillusioned with Daniel's ruthless leadership. She had quietly reached out to Michael after the scandal broke, hinting that she had information that could help Sarah's cause. The bell over the diner's entrance jingled, and Amanda walked in, her eyes darting nervously around the room. Michael raised a hand to catch her attention, and she made her way over, sliding into the seat across from him. She was in her early 40s, with tired eyes that betrayed years of stress under Daniel Morgan's rule. "You sure this place is safe?" Amanda asked, her voice low. Michael nodded. "Safe enough. Relax. You're not the only person who wants to see Daniel fall. You've got protection as long as you cooperate. So, what do you have for me?" Amanda hesitated for a moment, glancing around as if someone might be listening. Then she leaned forward and spoke in a hushed tone. "It's not just the offshore accounts. Daniel's been hiding other financial risks, deals that were barely legal. If those come to light, it won't just damage his reputation. The whole company could collapse. He's kept it buried by controlling key board members and legal advisors. But with everything happening now, cracks are starting to show." Michael's eyes narrowed as he absorbed the information. "You're saying we could bring the entire company down?" "Exactly," Amanda said, her expression serious. "But it's risky. If you push too hard and too fast, Daniel will retaliate in ways you can't predict. He's ruthless when cornered. I've seen him destroy people's lives without a second thought." Michael smirked, shaking his head. Oh, trust me, I know what he's capable of. But you're wrong about one thing. We're not pushing too fast. We're hitting him exactly where it hurts. And if he retaliates, Michael leaned in closer, his voice turning cold. We'll be ready. Amanda nodded reluctantly. All right, I'll get you access to the documents. But after that, I'm done. I can't afford to have my name dragged through this mess. You'll be safe, Michael assured her. Sarah's got resources of her own. Once this is over, you'll be free of him for good. Amanda didn't look entirely convinced, but she nodded and stood to leave. Michael watched her go, his mind already calculating their next steps. Daniel had always relied on fear and control to maintain his power. But fear was a double-edged sword, and now it was working against him. Later that evening, back at the mansion, Sarah was reviewing the latest updates from Michael when her phone rang. It was her lawyer, Catherine Holloway. Sarah took a deep breath before answering. Catherine, what's going on? We have a new problem, Catherine said, her tone grim. Daniel's legal team is trying to block your access to certain marital assets. He's also filed a motion for an emergency financial audit. He's coming after you, Sarah. Hard. Sarah's grip on the phone tightened. Let him try, she said through clenched teeth. He thinks he can intimidate me with legal games, but I'm not backing down. We have the truth on our side. Truth doesn't always win in court, Catherine warned gently. You need to be prepared for a long, ugly fight. I'm prepared, Sarah replied firmly. Daniel underestimated me for too long. He won't make that mistake again. And neither will I. As she hung up, a cold determination settled over her. Daniel was escalating the war, but she wouldn't be caught off guard. This fight wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about survival. Daniel sat in the darkened study of his penthouse, nursing a glass of whiskey as he stared out at the glittering city skyline. He hadn't slept in over 24 hours. His phone had been ringing nonstop with calls from investors, board members, and lawyers. His name was on every headline. His company was on the verge of collapse, and for the first time in his life, Daniel Morgan felt the crushing weight of losing control. Sarah, she's behind all of this. That thought burned in his mind like a constant drumbeat. He had underestimated her, and that mistake was tearing his world apart. His phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't an investor or PR crisis manager. It was a text from the private investigator he'd hired. We have a lead. She's working with Michael Hayes. You'll want to hear this. Daniel's grip tightened on the phone. Michael Hayes. Of course. The man he had discarded like trash years ago was now coming back to haunt him. They've both made it personal, and they're going to regret it. A sudden knock on the door broke his thoughts. Mia appeared hesitantly, her face pale and anxious. Daniel, are you okay? You've been in here all night. I'm fine, he muttered, not looking at her. He wasn't in the mood for her questions or her concern. Every minute he wasted in this room was another step closer to losing everything he had built. Mia hesitated, then approached slowly. I know you don't want to hear this, but maybe it's time to stop fighting Sarah. You could negotiate with her, find some way to de-escalate. Daniel turned sharply, his eyes blazing. Negotiate? You think I should bow down and let her destroy me? No, this isn't going to end with me losing. His voice was low but venomous, sending a chill through Mia. She backed away, clearly realizing she had crossed a line. I built this empire with my own hands, he continued, his voice cold and distant. No one is going to take it from me. Not Sarah. Not Michael. No one. Mia didn't say another word. She simply nodded and slipped out of the room, leaving Daniel alone with his fury and fear. He needed a new plan, something ruthless, something final. He couldn't rely on his lawyers or PR teams anymore. This war needed a more direct, personal approach. He had to get ahead of Sarah's next move before it was too late. Meanwhile, Sarah was seated in her sunroom, going over the latest intel from Michael. The documents Amanda had provided were damning, clear evidence of Daniel's illegal deals and financial manipulations. Once these were leaked to the authorities, Daniel would be facing more than just public scandal. Criminal investigations were inevitable. You've got him cornered, Michael said over the phone. His voice was steady but cautious. "But a cornered animal is the most dangerous. Be ready for anything." "I am," Sarah replied, though a part of her couldn't shake the anxiety gnawing at her. She had come so far, but the stakes were higher than ever. Daniel wouldn't go down quietly. She knew that, but she also knew that this time, she was stronger than he had ever imagined. As the night deepened, both Sarah and Daniel prepared for the final showdown, each aware that the next move could decide everything. Neither of them could afford to lose. The question now was, who would strike first? Sarah arrived at Morgan Industries headquarters just before dawn. The building loomed ahead like a fortress, but she no longer felt intimidated by it. She had spent years standing in Daniel's shadow, living under the weight of this empire he had built. But today, she wasn't here to be silent or compliant. Today, she was here to end the war. No more games. No more fear. Michael was already waiting inside, dressed in a sharp suit that blended seamlessly with the early morning office crowd. "It's all set," he whispered as she approached. "The documents have been sent to the authorities. The board will get the news within the hour. If Daniel doesn't step down voluntarily, they'll force him out." Sarah nodded, her jaw tightening. "He's not going to step down quietly. We both know that." "True," Michael said with a smirk. "But he doesn't have a choice anymore. His entire world is crumbling. It's just a matter of time." He gave her a reassuring nod and headed toward the elevators, leaving Sarah to brace herself for the final confrontation. In his office on the top floor, Daniel was pacing like a caged animal. The early reports from his lawyers confirmed his worst fears. Several regulatory agencies were already investigating the company, and half the board was calling for his resignation. He slammed his fist on the desk. How did it come to this? How did she do this to me? He had built this empire brick by brick, sacrificing everything to secure his legacy. But Sarah had torn it all apart. His phone buzzed. It was another call from Richard Evans, but Daniel ignored it. He wasn't ready to grovel in front of his own board. Instead, he turned to the window, his mind racing for a solution. That's when the door to his office opened, and Sarah walked in without knocking. "Sarah," Daniel said, his voice a mix of shock and fury. "What the hell are you doing here?" "I'm here to give you a chance," she replied calmly, stepping forward. Her eyes were cold, unwavering. "You can walk away now. Resign. If you do, I'll let you keep what's left of your reputation. Fight me, and you'll lose everything." Daniel laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "You think you've won? You think this is over?" He took a step closer, his voice lowering dangerously. "You don't understand what I'm capable of. You've started a war you can't control." Sarah didn't flinch. "No, Daniel. You're the one who doesn't understand. You spent years underestimating me. That ends today." She crossed her arms and leaned in slightly. "Your empire is falling apart. The board is done with you. The authorities are breathing down your neck. You have nothing left to threaten me with." Daniel's face contorted with rage, but he saw the truth in her words. The fight was over, and deep down he knew it. His shoulders sagged as the weight of his defeat settled on him. He had always believed himself to be untouchable. Now he stood on the edge of ruin, brought down by the very woman he had once controlled. After a long silence, he turned away, facing the window again. "Fine," he muttered. "You win." Sarah let out a slow breath, relief washing over her. But she didn't smile. This wasn't a victory to celebrate. It was simply the end of a long, bitter struggle. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the office, leaving Daniel alone with his shattered pride. As the sun rose over the city, Sarah stepped outside, the cool morning air filling her lungs. For the first time in years, she felt truly free. The war was over, and though the scars would remain, she had reclaimed her life. No longer a prisoner of Daniel's world, she was finally in control of her own destiny. I hope you enjoyed this gripping story. If you did, leave a like and subscribe to the channel to stay updated on more episodes filled with suspense, drama, and twists. Comment below and share your thoughts on the ending. What would you have done in Sarah's place? I'd love to hear your opinion. Thank you for watching. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story.